And welcome to Climate Chat. I am your host, Dan Miller, and today our special guest is Jigar Shah, who we were just chatting here before. We've known each other for a real long time, and we'll get into that a little bit, how we met. But many of you know that Jigar was the loan program officer in the Biden administration, giving out billions and billions and billions of dollars to interesting projects. So we're going to get into that. But he's done so much more than that. And some of you don't know that. So, Jigar, first of all, welcome to Climate Chat. Great to finally have you here.
Oh, great to be here.
And just give us a little bit of your background and, sort of kind of what led up to going into the Biden administration. What did you do before that?
Well, I grew up in rural Illinois and, graduated with a mechanical engineering degree and decided I wanted to work in solar energy. And so found my way there and worked at BP Solar. And so, and while I was there, had an opportunity to work within the larger BP organization as well on hydrogen strategy and wind strategy and natural gas strategy and all sorts of other stuff. So that was sort of my first big job. And then, started SunEdison, right? So popularized the solar financing technique that most people use today. And then joined Richard Branson to start the Carbon War Room. And that was a lot of fun. I've proven to myself that I'm a terrible fundraiser and, not great at running nonprofits, but it was a fantastic learning experience. And I think that theory of change continues today within the Rocky Mountain Institute because we were able to merge that organization to RMI. And then started Generate Capital, which I think even today continues to be a business model which is radically different from all other funds and allows you to do a lot of creative things, much of which they haven't taken advantage of since I left. But I think that, that's a fascinating conversation. And then joined the Biden administration and served for 4 years.
That's right. So, and we met at the Carbon War Room with
that's right.
when that was being formed and everything. We worked together on that for a little while. And that was quite a number of years ago. Okay, so that's great. Now, why don't we just jump into the Biden administration? I think a lot of people want to hear what happened there. We're going to jump all over the place, I think, and covering different subjects. But, so at the loan program office, I mentioned you helped lend out many billions. Is there a number you have in your head of how many billions?
We approved $107.5 billion worth of loans. So quite prolific.
And that went to various clean energy projects and kind of related kinds of things.
Well, there were lots of things that qualified, right? So, we had everything from restarting the first nuclear power plant here in the United States to hydrogen storage in Delta, Utah, to solar microgrids in Puerto Rico, and then everything in between, right? Battery manufacturing facilities, critical minerals facilities, and so it was quite a diverse set of projects, and so quite proud of being able to support entrepreneurs doing big things here in this country again.
And what were some of the more, I don't know, like interesting, exciting, or perhaps impactful? Take your pick, or maybe all of the above.
I'd say they were all equally, right? I mean, I think that it depends on your priors and what you come to it with, but certainly the Monolith Materials deal, right, which is plasma torch, splitting ethane or natural gas into carbon black and hydrogen, right, with no emissions, was groundbreaking. And I think since we've done that deal, I think we've crowded in billions of dollars of additional capital into 10 competitors to Monolith Materials, and so we are on track, I think, to doing a huge amount of what they call turquoise hydrogen production globally, and that approach actually is sub $1 a kilogram, right? So it's the only approach actually that unsubsidized is cheaper than gray hydrogen, right? Everything else is basically a premium. So that, I think, setting that thing off is fantastic, but also onshoring and reshoring battery manufacturing, right? We have 200 gigawatt hours of additional battery manufacturing facilities up and running in this country because of the work that we did. And we've got, Lithium Americas off to the races in terms of producing high quality lithium without all of the environmental degradation that happens in China. I think when you think about Syra Resources and the graphite processing that is in Vidalia, Louisiana, but also long duration energy storage, right? So we have that loan to EOS, which is a zinc halide technology in Turtle Creek, Pennsylvania, and all of their entire supply chain comes from an hour and a half of their facility in Pennsylvania, and so no explosion risk. All American technology. And, you're starting to see their technology take off, right? Because people are looking for 8 to 12 hours worth of battery storage now instead of just 1 to 4 hours. So, yeah, I mean, lots of stuff. But I mean, even when you look at what we did in Puerto Rico, the loans themselves were valuable. But what was really valuable was teaching Wall Street how to underwrite these loans, right? And so now you're seeing a huge amount of projects getting funded by Wall Street in this solar microgrid space that they were heretofore afraid to do, right? And so after we did $1 billion worth of those, I think you saw a lot of the Wall Street firms go, "Oh, I guess we were dumb and we should have done those things beforehand." But we needed the loan programs office to go first.
A little bit like Generate Capital, it was sort of the same model.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
were first to finance these new projects and then made them acceptable for the broader
totally. I
financial.
mean, like the project finance space is filled with people who are followers, right? There aren't that many people who get paid enough to be leaders.
So let's jump into some of these things. So all technologies have like sort of the gotchas there. So let's talk a little. Just wondering, like within the administration, how you talked about this. Hydrogen, for example, is a very powerful indirect greenhouse gas, 10 to 30 times more powerful at warming than CO2 is, because it eats up the hydroxy radicals that destroy methane. Is that ever actually brought up, or is it hydrogen just viewed as this pure clean technology?
Well, I think that there are two distinct conversations, right? One is a commercialization of technology conversation, and then there is a gigaton scale conversation, right? And I think the biggest problem that most advocates have is that they conflate the two because they believe that there's not enough money to do both, right? And so that if you support hydrogen, then somehow their favorite technology gets short shrift, which of course is completely untrue, right? I mean, there's enough money to do all of it. So I think this is where people really have a problem. And hydrogen was the worst of all of it, right? I mean, the environmental advocates really screwed themselves in a big way. When you think about the 3 pillars stuff with 45V, right? There are so many extraordinary concepts that never got off the ground. And as a result, like we have destroyed hydrogen innovation in the world for the better part of 10 years, right? I think it'll take another 10 years before we figure out how to decarbonize 100 million tons of hydrogen production that we live with right now every year, right? And so we have 100 million tons of production every year using gray hydrogen, which, when you look at all of the great ideas that we had, whether it was blue or pink or green or turquoise, a lot of those companies had a lot of momentum in 2023, and they've now lost it all because of stupidity from advocates.
Well, it sounds a lot, by the way, it's very similar to what happens with the choice between carbon removal and renewable energy. Like there's a fixed budget for saving civilization.
Well, and they're dramatically different investors, as you know. Like nobody who invests in renewable energy would ever invest in carbon capture, right? They're just not the same people, right? I mean, look at Bill Gates. Bill Gates has never invested in renewable energy. He's never wanted to invest in renewable energy, but he invests in all sorts of other things, which is great. But like he's not interested in renewable energy, right? And so the investors are just completely different investors, right? And so the thing that bothers me about advocates broadly is that they believe that somebody who's doing a science project or a first of a kind deployment needs to be, strangled in the crib, which makes no sense to me at all. Like build the first 3 locations, see how it goes, see what the cost reduction curve is, all that stuff. And then when you need to build 100 facilities, yeah, we should have that argument around policy, right? And what we should be spending incentive money on, right? But we shouldn't be strangling, whether it's nuclear or whether it's geothermal or whether it's critical minerals or whether it's whatever. I think that the first of a kind deployment commercialization work should be free from a lot of these bigger topics at that stage.
Yeah. Okay. By the way, was the carbon capture covered in your?
Sure, we did the Wabash facility, which was the Trump administration finally close a loan and, wired money out of it. But I think that, that deal is carbon, has carbon sequestration associated with it. So, we certainly had carbon sequestration projects that were eligible under our program. We didn't do a lot of them just because so many of them required so much time to get their Class 6 wells and all that stuff that like they didn't hit the finish line while I was still in office.
Yeah. And how about solar radiation management? Did any of those come
No,
up?
geoengineering doesn't really have a business model per se that comes through the loan office, right?
That's
So
true.
that's more of grant funding, and frankly, the biggest problem with geoengineering, I would say, is governance, right? And we worked on that a lot at the Carbon War Room when I was there, right? We
Hmm.
co-published a really fantastic report with the Royal Society of the UK to grapple with these issues, and then worked at Asilomar to, put together some of the ethics conversations around that and what people should do. At the time, if you remember, Paul Allen was alive, and he was rattling all sorts of things that he wanted to do unilaterally, and we were like, wait a second, like, it's one thing to drop a few iron filings into the ocean just for experimentation. It's another thing to actually say that, you're so powerful and so amazing that you can solve all the world's problems without governance.
I was at that Asilomar conference.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool. Okay. For the audience, there was an Asilomar conference. I think it was
Like 2012, maybe
yeah,
2011,
2012.
something like
It was one
that.
of the
Yeah.
first geoengineering conferences where it was really focused on real geoengineering. You didn't hear much about it, the subject, until more recently again, but a lot of interesting people there.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so gee, we can go. How about just what's your take on nuclear? Like both sort of shorter term SMR, is it something that's going to get cheap and fast in
No,
the
of
next
course not.
10 years?
No, of course not. But I think it's very obvious to anyone who has studied energy systems that the only way we're going to get rid of coal in India and China is through nuclear, right? And other clean firm power technologies, right? When you look at India and China, they've made it crystal clear that solar, wind, and battery storage is for growth, right? And the established base of power plants, they're really not going to replace until they figure out nuclear. And China is figuring out nuclear. They've got 30 plus reactors now under construction. They figured out how to reduce their cost, which is fantastic. It's still much more expensive than their coal, but in general, I think they believe that they're going to get their costs down to a point where they find it acceptable to shut down their coal and replace it with nuclear, which I think is great. And I think you're starting to see that same realization in places like the US and other places, because we did a lot of work and showed that when you have a lot of clean firm power generation, you don't have to overbuild the grid by 3x, which, by the way, we can't seem to even keep up with the grid as it is. Like, I mean, the total number of miles that we built in the transmission sector, new miles in the last 5 years, has been atrocious, right? So if you're not going to build more transmission lines such that you can waste it, right, by building 3x the transmission, only using it a third of the time, then you have to use what you've already built far more efficiently. And that means, putting power through those lines 75% of the time.
But so what about batteries? I mean, in terms of firm power, like they dropped 90% in the last 10 years, might drop another 90% in the next
Batteries are
10 years.
fantastic. I think you and I both know that batteries are fantastic,
Sure.
right? But ultimately, batteries are, best used on, sort of like day to day, week to week storage, right? They're not really designed for seasonal storage. And so when you think about the cost of a system, if you've got power sources that are generating power 92% of the time, like nuclear power, or geothermal could fall in the same bucket.
Hmm.
Hydro generally doesn't run that way, even though it could. Um, then it makes your batteries a lot more cost effective on both the generator side and on the demand side, right? Remember, batteries are used for a variety of purposes. I mean, there's, I don't know, like 8 or 9 different things that they can get paid to do. But
Right.
the main thing that we need batteries for is to get way more out of the distribution grid, right? So we were talking just about transmission, but the
Hmm.
distribution grid is that last mile that
Hmm.
serves your neighborhood. And right now, that last mile is sized so that everyone can turn everything on at the exact same time. And so
Hmm.
as a result, much of our distribution grid is used 15% of the time, right? Such low capacity utilization. So as 3 of your neighbors put in more electric vehicles or heat pumps or whatever it is, the utility chooses to pay $100 million to upgrade your distribution circuit for 3 electric vehicles, right? Now, the better way of doing that is to have demand flexibility or batteries at the distribution substation, et cetera. But utilities are more comfortable putting batteries at transmission substations, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so they are currently not solving for the number one thing that batteries can do, which is to dramatically reduce electricity rates at the distribution circuit level, right? And
Hmm.
so that is where batteries are focused today. They're not focused on making solar and wind 24/7 dispatchable power plants, and that's not a great profitable use case for batteries, even if batteries came down in cost by another factor of 2.
Yeah, but I think, well, they're going to come down to a factor of 10, of course,
I
over a
doubt it.
decade.
We'll see. I mean, I doubt
Over
it.
a
We'll see.
decade?
Like, I mean, if you look at the cost of batteries today, like when I started funding batteries at Generate Capital, we were at $1,000 a kilowatt
Yeah,
hour. Today, the battery itself is around $69 a kilowatt hour, right? Not the
exactly.
system, but the battery itself, right? Of
Hmm.
that $69 a kilowatt hour, the raw materials in that battery is roughly three-quarters of that cost. And so there's not that much more you can reduce. So if you look at the best technologies in the world, like Sila Nano and all these other extraordinary technologies that dramatically increase density, right? Doubles the
Hmm.
density of lithium ion batteries. They're not projecting that you would actually reduce the battery cell cost much more. They're saying that you would reduce the package cost more, right? Because you could get
Hmm.
twice as much battery in the same footprint. So, the package cost today is $200 a kilowatt hour. And so you could reduce that even more to $150 a kilowatt hour, maybe. But I don't think people are suggesting you get to $15 per
Well, how
kilowatt hour
about
battery.
sodium batteries, for
Like, not
example?
dense enough. Like, sodium's never gonna make it compared to zinc halides and all those other technologies. I think
I
when you
meant, by
think
the way,
about
not for fixed storage. I don't mean for EVs, because
I don't know for sure, but I'm just saying, like, when you think about comparing sodium with zinc halide batteries, like, zinc halide has no, volatile chemicals whatsoever, and you can, like, get all the materials that you need for dirt cheap, within an hour of Turtle Creek, Pennsylvania. So, like, I just think I'm not against sodium batteries, but I just wanna make sure that we're crystal clear. Like, I am so proud of the fact that we have had 95% cost reductions in wind, solar, batteries,
absolutely.
whatever, right? But to suggest that we're going to have another 95% cost reduction from where we are today is like fanciful thinking. It's not needed, frankly, to be able to solve the grid's problems. Like when you think about the Edison Electric Institute currently believes that they're going to invest $1.1 trillion into the US grid between 2025 and 2029, right? That's their stated goal on their website, right?
Hmm.
Half of that is maintenance capex, right? Stuff is old, needs to be replaced. Fine, we're not going to fix that. The other half is growth capex, so $550 billion of growth capex. Today, $50 billion worth of batteries can replace all $550 billion of that growth capex, right?
Hmm.
And so, like today, the batteries at today's cost, $250 a kilowatt hour for utility scale and $550 a kilowatt hour for CNI batteries, can basically replace $550 billion worth of capex, right? So that's pretty damn cost effective,
Yeah.
90% cheaper than what they're planning to do now. It doesn't have to be 5 billion to unlock that use case.
So, well, speaking of that, actually, so far on a global net basis, I know there's differences in different countries and regions. 100% of renewable energy has gone to supply new energy demand.
That's right.
We
More
know
than
that
that,
because
actually. Yeah.
fossil fuel emissions are at a record high. So, by definition, it hasn't reduced fossil fuel emissions.
Well,
And
I don't know that that's true, to be clear. Like, I mean, both things can be true, right? One is that in the first half of this year, we added about 403 terawatt hours of renewable energy that's
mhm,
new, and demand increase was about 369 terawatt hours, right? So we exceeded demand increase in the first half of this year. And then nuclear was another 33 terawatt hours. So you add that to the 403, I mean, you're
wasn't
really
that
getting
only
it up.
electricity, though?
I'm just talking about electricity,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I'm
So
talking about energy, right?
no,
Because
I know, but I mean, just
climate doesn't care what
electricity,
we
right?
do with the electricity only,
Well,
right?
climate may not care, but I think the math actually matters, right? And then separately, we need to figure out how we actually electrify more faster, right? And so
Yeah,
we're now up to 1 in 4 vehicles globally being electric vehicles, right? That doesn't displace the existing fleet, but it means on the new side,
yeah.
1 in 4 are going in, which is good. I think you're starting to see, a huge growth in heat pumps in the United States. And so, for the first time ever, like, heat pumps are now exceeding, natural gas-based equivalents in terms of new deployments. I think you're starting to see advanced heat pump water heaters going in
Mm.
at record numbers, right? Which is 70% less electricity consumption than resistance electricity water heating, right? So I think you're starting to see on the margins, right, that we are really winning on the electrification side, but that then leads to more growth, right, which then leads to more pressure on
Yeah.
new production, which I think we're up to the challenge on, right? So I think that, to me, this is a good news story. I think that the reason why we've had such a hard time reducing fossil fuels is because the solutions that we were pushing 10 years ago were inferior to the solutions that we have today. So today, I think most of the world views going 0 to 60 in 2.6 seconds to be better in an electric vehicle than in a fossil fuel vehicle. I don't know that that was
Mhm.
true 10 years ago, right? But today they believe that, right? And they now have affordable options. You can buy a used Tesla Model 3 right now for $15,000, right? Which is fantastic. And you can buy a new Chevy Blazer for $33,000, right? And so that wasn't true 10 years ago. So I think that we all just need to recognize that we in the climate solutions movement took longer to bring the cost down to the masses than, folks had in their initial PowerPoint deck for their venture capitalists.
Well, yeah, except that in reality, it's been cheaper for a long, long time because we're comparing it to fossil fuels that are highly subsidized and don't pay their true cost. So when you look at
But you weren't going to fix that.
what was that?
You weren't going to fix that. I
Well,
mean, as much
no,
as
not the
people use that,
entrepreneurs. No, I'm kind of tying it back now to the Biden administration. So
no, but I'm just saying, look at the Australian administration or look at the Carney administration in Canada or look at
yeah.
the EU, right? These are all places that have dabbled with carbon prices for a long time, which is how you would,
Mhm.
level the playing field, right, with fossil fuels. And
Right.
it's been an unmitigated disaster. Like when you think about politically, the people who put those prices in lose their job. And so,
Well,
like, what
yeah.
what
Well, they're
message are
not
you going
doing
to?
it the right way, by the way.
Well,
Even
whether they're
Canada,
doing it,
which had the right kind of fee and dividend approach, you have to send out a
British
separate check
Columbia was a
saying,
disaster. Just to be clear, they had a fee and dividend approach and was a disaster. Like no one can suggest that British Columbia was a success story.
I'm just saying there are, but okay, but that's that.
No, no, but Dan, the reason I say things in absolutes, not because like the
Yeah.
gray areas don't exist. The reason I'm saying this is I want to make sure that climate advocates
Mhm.
don't start drinking their own Kool-Aid, right? Like, look, I think like we tried price on carbon, it didn't work. When you look at what the Europeans are doing right now to
Mhm.
decimate their industrial sector with their carbon pricing,
Mhm.
it's not working, right? It's not like you're seeing a huge amount of heat pumps going in right now on the industrial scale, even though it's totally cost effective. You've got, like LNG coming in at $15 a million BTU, right? Or thermal batteries, right? From Antora and some of those
Mhm.
folks. It's
Mhm.
not like they're doing billion-dollar business in Europe right now, right? But they should and they could. I think that we all have to recognize that the amount of work that it takes to take these old stodgy industries and move them into the next generation of technology, right, is something that is a different set of tools than putting a price on carbon.
Well, by the way, how about just get rid of the fossil fuel subsidies?
Do it. I'm
No,
pretty
no. Well,
sure
it's
you're
not, I
going to
mean, I
fail, but like
okay,
you
I'll
should
do
do
it.
it.
I agree to do it, but unfortunately, I'm not in
You
the
can't get the
administration.
votes. And the Democratic Party, for
Right.
instance, tried to do it. And what they did instead was destroy 9 Senate seats in the United States that they're never going to get back, right? Senate seats in Missouri or North Dakota or in Louisiana. And people are like, well, those are fossil fuel senators. Great. So now you're basically telling me that you would rather lose on a regular basis and be right on the substance of whatever argument you're making than actually have the political power in the Senate to be able to pass whatever legislation you want to pass.
No, what I am saying is that climate change is not being taken seriously by any administration.
That's not true at all.
Obama and well, uh, wait, you're saying it's not true?
Of course, it's not true. The suggestion that like the Obama administration or the Biden administration didn't take climate change seriously is ridiculous. What we're saying though is that like every single idea that advocates came forward with was a political loser. Not only
Okay.
was it a political loser, it was literally just lighting yourself on fire is how
Okay.
bad the ideas were. And anyone who actually supported Waxman-Markey, for instance, which was a total political loser, right? It was just like, we are going to
It wouldn't have been an
manufacture
effective
credits,
policy
right?
anyway, even if it passed.
Totally. We were going to manufacture credits out of thin air, give them for free at billion-dollar scale to large corporations who didn't need them. And we were going to basically like bribe them into doing the right thing, right? I mean, like, of course it was a political loser, and it resulted in Donald Trump becoming president in 2016. Like, because people were like, why are we just transferring money to rich corporations?
No, because it was I agree, by the way, that was a bad
I
policy.
know you agree, but I'm just saying that, like, the thing that bothers me the
No,
most
no,
about
no, no.
these
Wait, let's not get off of
conversations.
that though, because that's one direction. The other direction is Obama and Biden administration both increased fossil fuel production, right?
Of course they did, because it was a huge political winner. Huge
Correct.
political winner.
But well, political winner, but climate loser, right? Would you agree with that?
No, not necessarily.
Really?
I think that in general, we have to recognize that the way in which we are going to succeed at making this transition occur faster is by actually reducing the cost of fossil fuels. For a long time, people thought that we needed to increase the cost of fossil fuels. I'm telling you, we need oil at $50 a barrel all day. What that means is now the tar sands in Canada don't pencil. The Arctic
Hmm.
oil doesn't pencil. Fracking doesn't pencil. The only thing that pencils at $50 barrel of oil is, the existing stuff that's conventional, which is about 75 million barrels a day globally. And we use about 105 million barrels a day globally, right? So that means that 30 million barrels a day wouldn't pencil if we were able to get gasoline costs down to whatever it is, $2.50 a gallon. And then what you realize, as you know firsthand, is that 20% of Americans drive over 20,000 miles a year. Those super users should move to electric vehicles next week, but we designed policies to help people who only drive 7,000 miles a year. Why did we do that? Instead of having a $7,500 EV tax credit, we should have said we're going to double the deduction for, people who drive for a living, Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, salesmen, whatever. And we're going to say, instead of, writing off 55 cents a mile for gasoline powered vehicles, you get to write off $1.10 per mile if you're driving electric, right? Then the guy in Palo Alto driving 7,000 miles a year with his, Model S doesn't get the same benefit as the person who's driving a Tesla Model 3 driving 50,000 miles a year, right? But like, that's smart policy, right? We should have done that. But like, the notion that the way that we're going to get to the energy transition is by hurting poor people on purpose, that is a bad political strategy.
Well, by the way, Jim Hansen agrees that we're going to succeed when the price of oil drops to zero.
I
That's
know that Jim Hansen agrees, but
yeah.
but I'm just saying
But
that is not the conventional wisdom that folks in the climate movement discuss.
but also what Jim Hansen agrees is that we're going to be hitting 2 degrees 2030. And we had a program here how it's possible, not that it's going to happen for sure, but a reasonable probability we're going to hit 3 degrees by 2050 or so, which is I just want to ask you, what's your thoughts on what kind of world is it at 2 degrees and 3 degrees? And within
It's
the
not a world.
administration, is that kind of discussion go on, or is there a feeling that there's a status quo 10 and 20 years from now?
No, I think those of us who've studied climate are absolutely worried. And those of us who, like me, have 10-year-old children are completely worried, right? So, like, I mean, I agree. But I think it's important to recognize that there are 8 billion people in the world, right? And we have an entire generation of people who have been moving to the right over the last, 15 to 20 years because of mistakes that people have made on lots of issues, whether it's immigration or other things, right? Like, it's important to recognize that, like, getting a politician to agree with you isn't the same thing as making sure that that politician is doing smart things so they can stay in office, because they're not really worth much to you if they get voted out of office, right? So part of my challenge, as you know, is that I worked very hard on getting the Paris Agreement done in 2015. I personally went around the world and helped convince China, India, South Africa, and Brazil that this was the largest wealth creation opportunity of our lifetimes. You remember that like the conventional wisdom in the 2009 Copenhagen negotiations was this was only going to be a little bit of sacrifice to be able to like save the planet, right? And I knew that that framing was horrible, and that's why Richard Branson and I did the Carbon War Room, and we basically talked about the fact that this was going to be the largest entrepreneurial, success story of our lifetime. But then what happened was Bill Gates destroyed the media narrative by going on stage with Obama in 2015 and saying, this is all about mission innovation, right? That like the stuff that we have now is not worth deploying at scale, and that instead we need to innovate our way out of it. We all love innovation. I'm not against us investing more in R&D and clean cement, clean steel, hard to abate sectors. But in 2015, you and I both know that everyone in the world knew that solar panels had come down in cost and that we were basically on track to this breakthrough, right?
Right.
But we wasted 10 years. We wasted 10 years not deploying it at scale, not figuring out the policies to go from a 5% penetration rate to a 50% penetration rate. And it wasn't until the Ukraine conflict in 2022 that the Europeans took 25 years of practice and deployed a ton of cool stuff in 2 years, right? I mean, 60% of Russian gas was displaced by energy efficiency and heat pumps. Only 40% of it was replaced by LNG imports, right? But that narrative hasn't gotten there. We could have done that 5 years earlier, right? And it would have made everything more affordable. Like the thing that bothers me the most in this moment is that we have to focus on the list of things that have a 95% cost reduction that has already occurred and deploying those at scale. And instead, I would say the vast majority of climate advocates have their top 10 policies memorized for the commercialization of technologies that are out of the money. But if you talk to, Governor Spanberger or Governor Sherrill elect Sherrill in New Jersey and said, what are the top 5 policies that you would pass this week to like help reduce electricity bills 20% by 2030? Most climate advocates don't have that list memorized.
But you talk about it like it's the climate advocates asking for too much or something, and they blew it politically.
I don't think they're asking for too much, just not the right things.
Kind of thing. That's why Trump is in office. But there also is this other aspect: is that the fossil fuel industry owns most of these politicians, gives them lots and lots of money, spends millions and millions of dollars on disinformation to make these climate policies look bad, right?
Sure, of course they do. Like, look,
it's not like it's like. I mean, I don't know. It's not like climate advocates have the ear of everyone, and then they give these bad advice, and boom, it all falls apart. I mean, that's not what's happening.
Look, I'm not suggesting the climate advocates are at fault in terms of like the greater narrative. I mean, the fossil fuel industry has spent tons of money on like spreading misinformation, and it's roughly 5 times more than the climate tech industry spends on its own advocacy, right? But what I'm saying is that when people come to me with ideas that they control, right? Because I don't control the fossil fuel industry, but when people come to me with ideas that they control, and those ideas lead to more expensive prices for poor people, right? I tell them to go back and drop new ideas. And for a long time, people didn't do that. People said, "Oh yeah, I guess a little bit of pain on behalf of poor people is fine," and that's not fine. And all of us need to have greater humanity here around the fact that energy is essential to a modern lifestyle. And so we need to make sure that our deployment of technology is actually in line with affordability. We should have done that.
Tell this to the Trump administration. They're going.
I am telling that to the Trump administration, and they are completely batshit. When you think about like what they're doing right now, it is the exact opposite of affordability. I call them out all the time on that. But I just think it's important for all of us to recognize, right, that if you want to win elections every single year, right, you need to be on the side of middle class and poor people who are suffering from a high energy burden and make sure that their costs go down. And frankly, the biggest place where we can make an impact is on vehicles. It's not on electricity, right? Like when you look at a household's energy burden, the vast majority of their energy burden comes from refueling at the pump. It doesn't come from their electricity bill.
Although those are going up too, but that's let's get back to this 2 and 3 degrees, because Yes, right now, people, and this is obviously true, that people care about the here and now. They care about their current budget of what they're spending today on food and energy and everything. And 2 weeks out, certainly 10 years out, is not on the horizon, doesn't work politically, even though they might even intellectually understand that this thing called climate change is coming. But scientifically, we know that it's way worse than, yeah, even some of the climate science, IPCC says. I mean, the measured data shows that warming's accelerating, that we are on track for 2 degrees next decade, not 50 years from now. And this is going to be utterly catastrophic, period. I mean, it's just look
Yeah,
at
look, I
Jamaica
mean,
right
you and I
now,
are
or
very
North
sober.
Carolina. It's already happening. And this is nothing yet, right? This is nothing compared to what it is at
No,
two,
you and I are
two and a
very
half.
sober about what's coming.
Right. Politically, I'm not going to disagree with you about what you said politically. That's the way the system works. It's all based on short-term,
No, but what I'm
benefits
asking
and
you,
costs.
Dan, is
What's
what
that?
have we learned over the last 15 years, right? So
Okay.
when you think about the Ukraine conflict, right? So, like when you think about what's coming, there are going to be more wars that are started over energy, right?
Mhm.
That's certainly going to happen. When that happens, are we ready to deploy climate solutions at scale, right? Like the whole look, when you think about World War II, right? FDR and his man from General Motors was waiting for, Pearl Harbor or something like that to occur because they knew that something was going to happen that convinced the American people we had to get into the fight. But for 3 or 4 years, we were not allowed to get in the fight. But
Right.
they were ready and they had all these plans drawn up and they had talked about stuff. And so when we got hit, right, they immediately went into action and we generated so many airplanes and so much stuff and whatever. And like we changed over our entire industrial capacity. That's my job, right? My job is to make sure that all of these climate solutions have a supply chain that is like, done first of a kind deployments, now at commercial scale, et cetera, so that when the proverbial shit hits the fan, we can 10x, right? Well, it's
Mhm.
hitting the fan now. And you see countries like Ethiopia now banning internal combustion engine vehicles because electric vehicles are cheap
Yeah.
and they have surplus electricity production in Ethiopia. And
Mhm.
so they don't want to import finished goods like gasoline and diesel and use their fixed currency to do that. I mean, Pakistan, after China's Belt and Road Initiative let them down with their power plants, converted 25% of their entire grid in 3 years to solar. Right? We
Mhm.
could replicate that next week in 50 countries. So, what is it that you and I should do together to replicate that into 50 countries? There are certainly companies like Sun King that's doing $600 million worth of 2-year financing in the marketplace today, right? To help the 700 million people in the world who are in extreme electricity poverty move to, more modern, services. You've got electric vehicles being imported into all of South America and other places, right, from China. And so when you think about how fast we could convert the entire world supply chain over the next 5 years, it's breathtaking. And the question is, what is it that you and I should do to actually move trillions of dollars of additional capital into those markets to make their lives better? We are
Mhm.
at that moment now where we are the ones who control trillions of dollars, right? It's us that actually most of the pension funds and others trust when we give them recommendations, right? We're the ones who are the best at putting together the PowerPoint and the thesis and then hiring the right analysts and doing all that stuff to do that. So, what is it that you and I are going to do to accelerate the deployment of these solutions such that we crash global oil prices like Jim Hansen wants us to do, right? That we crash LNG prices globally as Jim Hansen wants us to do, right? Like, how do we make his vision come true?
Well, really. So what you're saying, by the way, obviously, I'm excited about what's happened already in terms of it took solar panels over 30 years, like dropping 99%, whatever,
Right.
and the growth in the last 10 years, where the price of renewables dropped below fossil fuels in many applications. Again, mostly electricity, but like we could replace all fossil fuels for electricity like really soon, and save trillions of dollars doing it.
Right. And there are
Fantastic.
a lot of
That's
countries
fantastic,
who want to do that.
but we're still on track for but the climate doesn't really care. about how
Well, but
much
the climate
renewables
isn't
we
going to be
make. It
helped
cares about
through.
how much fossil fuels we emit. And eventually, I totally agree that as really cheap renewables and other clean energies skyrockets, it's going to finally eat away and get the price of fossil fuels down. Another way, but even then, once the shit hits the fan, the shit hits the fan for the next thousands of years. It doesn't stop hitting the fan.
Well, of course it does, right? And you and I can only
Wait,
do
it
what we
does?
control. No, of course, of course that the CO2 that's already in the atmosphere takes many, many years to start to abate and all that
Yeah.
stuff. So some of the
Mhm.
warming is built in. But all I'm saying to you is that I meet 30-year-olds, right?
Mhm.
35-year-olds that are, betting it all, starting a new company, doing that stuff. And what they need from me is 100% of my help to unlock all of this capital and other things to go their way, right? And if I don't do that work, right? If I'm so selfish that I basically am like, well, I'm only going to do it if I make a 10x return on my money by investing in you, right? Then they don't succeed at scale, right? We already have thousands of people around the world who are working in Nigeria and Ethiopia and other places.
Mhm.
We have thousands of people around the world that are working in every US state and county, right? And they need our help, right? A lot of the jurisdictions that you and I have a lot of influence over are not doing the right thing at scale. They're just not. Right. And whether it's the city council or the school board, or whether it's the state legislature or the governors, right. And so the solutions providers are there. They've raised money, they've got their solutions. They need a contract, right? They need someone to actually give them a contract. And so, look, that's the only way the climate benefits. The climate benefits because we
No,
deploy
it's not
these
the only
solutions
way
at
the
scale.
climate benefit. It's a way, and by the way, I think you've been doing an exceptional job again, even before the Biden administration would generate just different and SunEdison, the way to finance the
Sure.
clean energies. I mean, you've been innovative in that, and that's fantastic and has a huge impact. However, there is another complementary way to do it. And that's called policy. And I would argue that even with all the wonderful advancements and lower costs, and I agree with what you're saying on all of that, it's not enough because fossil fuel emissions are not dropping. Hopefully, they're plateauing if we're lucky, and then maybe they'll go down a little bit. But we need them dropping like a rock to avoid. I mean, 3 degrees is what
Yeah, but
four
what are you
degrees used to be,
suggesting
right? And we had
exactly?
Kevin Anderson on, and he famously said in 2010 that 4 degrees warming is not compatible with an organized global community, which means like collapse of civilization, right? I had him on last year, and he said, well, with what we know now, that number is probably 3 degrees, right? And we're headed for that in the middle of the century. And
So
the
what
only
are
way
you
we're going to
suggesting
avoid it is a
exactly?
combination of having the solutions available and deployable at scale, but also policies that phase out fossil fuel use so it actually drops rapidly rather than this very, very slow thing that we'll have the way it's
Right, but
happening
what
now.
exactly are you suggesting? I mean, I pass policy all the time and have since 2001, right? With renewable portfolio standards and all sorts of stuff. So what is it exactly that you're suggesting that we pass that's different than what we're passing now?
Well, instead of under Biden, for example, and Obama expanding fossil fuel production to actually phase it out, simply to phase it out. So all electricity start. I mean, and you have this time frames. All electricity in 2035 has to be clean. Period. And then for you do the same
That
thing.
was never going to happen.
Oh no,
So
I'm
then
sorry, not
try
2035.
again.
But what? Say again.
That was never going to happen. So try again. Remember, I feel like you don't really understand what happened under the Biden administration. Biden came into office. Remember, he got elected in November of 2020. He
Mhm.
then the next week basically announced that he was going to stop issuing new oil and gas leases, all this other stuff, right? Senator Heinrich was apoplectic, right? Even though he's a huge climate leader, because New Mexico is one of the largest producers of oil and gas, right? And he was like, why are you making my life more difficult by saying all these things out loud? The next day, this is all before Biden became president, right? This is after the election, before Biden became president. The American Petroleum Institute came out and said, look, you guys are the biggest anti oil and gas,
Mhm.
president I've ever met, right? And for that next year, there were all these things. Like the president went on, the for the State of the Union and basically said, we're going to phase out fossil fuels, exactly the way that you said it, right? And then the Ukraine conflict occurred. It was like crap, and gasoline prices went up, remember? Because oil prices went up. And then, people got freaked out, right? And so now the Biden administration was hat in hand going to the fossil fuel industry saying, please drill more because, we need oil prices to go down, right? And then they negotiated the deal with Russia to make sure that you could have black market sales to India, et cetera, but it was below market. All I'm saying is that think about, this was the most proactive anti-fossil fuels president in my lifetime. And it was an unmitigated political disaster, right? So exactly what is it that you're suggesting? And who is it that's so dumb that they're going to do that in
Oh,
the
no, I
world?
think what you're saying is that we're screwed. You're
No,
saying
I'm
the
not
way the
saying
political
we're
system is
screwed.
set
I'm
up,
saying
it's
we're
not
not a
possible to reduce fossil fuel emissions. You agree scientifically that this continued use of fossil fuel emissions will send us over 2 and 3 degrees, and that's where we're heading. And deal with it, I guess. I'm not
No,
sure.
I'm not saying that. I mean, it might end up being the net impact of what I'm saying, but in general, I'm saying to you that, when you think about the essential role that fossil fuels play in the world today around, making people's lifestyles a more modern lifestyle, right? I mean, everybody wants to just order crap on Amazon and have it shipped to you, even though it's made in China and whatever, whatever. And so, the way to actually solve the problem is to create something better, right? And then you need to use policy to force people who have bad habits to use things that are better. Today, people are using energy technologies on a new basis that are not in their best interest, right? Like when you look at a new natural gas plant that's coming at over $200 a megawatt hour, right? Like when you basically buy a modified jet engine and try to run your data center off a modified jet engine, and then you need redundancy and resiliency, you're at $200 a megawatt hour. And, CAT has so many orders for that, that they've decided 2.5x their production of these 30 megawatt turbines, right? Now, batteries are 1/10 the cost of that, right? But you need policy to force people to do batteries because it is a huge departure from the way that they're used to running the grid. So I think we could pass policy to force people to put in batteries and reduce people's electricity bills 20% by 2030. But I don't know that you can force people to pass policy that bans new natural gas engines, right? I think we get to the same place, but I feel like the amount of creativity in the policy movement right now to actually get this done is as low as I've ever seen it. Like
Well, of course,
people,
right now we elected a president who wants to drill baby drill and
but forget
doesn't
about
believe
the
in climate change.
president.
I mean, so people, I mean, first of all, I have to agree with you that people are not driven to vote on climate. I don't know how
No, well, you
we
taught
have
me that.
examples
You
that is all
taught
we
me
need,
that
right?
15 years ago.
What?
You taught me that 15 years
Yeah,
ago with Bob Perkowitz and all sorts of great
yeah,
people
but
who've
I
done
was
great work.
hoping
Why would
that
you hope?
someday when it became clear, which is only becoming clear now, that climate impacts are going to get everybody, and you can see them in other places like Jamaica, North Carolina, whatever, California,
I
even
don't
where I
think
live, my insurance went away. I lost a vacation home to a climate fire. So it's happening personally to me, and I've been talking about climate for over 20 years. So
no, and I'm sorry
it's
to
happening to a
hear
lot of
that.
people, right? But we're
And
still
I'm
not
sorry
voting.
to hear that.
We're still not voting on that stuff.
We're never
And
going to. We're never going to, Dan. Like whether you talk about Dan Leishowitz and his work at Yale, or you talk about Bob Perkowitz and his work, like everyone who's ever been smarter than me, which is everybody, who's tried to explain this to me is basically like climate is the worst possible issue to
yeah,
make tangible for people, right? So as a result, we have to go the other way, which is that if you want your lives to be better, if you want choice, if you want cheaper energy, the way to do it is through new technology. It's not through subsidizing old technology, it's through deploying new technology, right? And I've had 50 countries in the world right now who are accelerating because of the example of Ethiopia and Nepal and Pakistan, et cetera, that do not have enough support. When you talk to the aid agencies in Europe, they're not providing enough technical assistance to these 50 countries to help with the transition. When you talk to, for-profit companies in the United States, they're not working to sell their solutions in these countries, even though they desperately need them. Right. And so we're in this situation where all of us are crying over the fact that like we're heading towards 2 degrees or 3 degrees, but like, like scaring people through David Wallace Wells is not working. And so then everyone needs to recognize what is working, right? Like we are
But he's
sentient
saying don't
people.
subsidize. Again, we'll go back. Fossil fuels, we subsidize it at least $1 trillion a year, like globally. And the IMF or somebody said it was 7 trillion like the year before.
Well, because they count the
Ukraine.
pollution.
Yeah.
They count the open sewer of the planet as part of the
But
subsidies.
still, well, speaking of the open sewer, the Harvard study showing that 8 million people a year die from fossil fuel pollution, not climate
Not in
change.
the United States. That's in
But still a lot in the United States. But yeah, millions in
No,
China,
most
millions
of
in
that
India.
is in, like the 700 million people who are in extreme electricity poverty, where solar plus battery storage is 1/10 of the cost of diesel in those markets.
Yeah.
And so we have thousands of entrepreneurs that are solving that problem, and they are not getting the funding that they need, even though they generate 30% returns on their stuff because people are like, I don't want to work in Africa. And so like all of us need to put our big boy pants on and use our, networks and credentials to get them money, right? Like if you give them $1 trillion, they will make you a 30% return on that $1 trillion. But a lot of people would rather get a 6% return investing in a CD in their bank.
No, by the way, don't get me wrong. I totally agree 100% with the idea of deploying renewables in the most innovative, cost-effective way globally. I worked on X Prize trying to get them to
I
do
know. We're
to do
talking to the
exactly
audience
this.
here.
But
I'm not yelling at you. I'm yelling at the audience.
but well, the audience here, I think, is all for doing all these things too. But
Well,
it
no,
really gets
that's
back
not
to let's
that's not
assume.
true.
Well,
To be
let's
clear,
say we do what you're saying. What do you think that actually translates? And we do it well. I mean, not just how we're doing it now, but we take your advice. The money starts flowing to the right kinds of places and gets the subsidies or at least the financing to deploy globally, clean energy, EVs and everything. What do you think that does to fossil fuel emissions trajectory over, let's say, between now, 2050, 2060?
I think that if every time somebody was in an emergency situation, they opted for clean energy solutions over diesel, I think you would change hearts and minds around the world. Today, I think people believe that in an emergency, they should turn to diesel. Like if you look at Jamaica versus Haiti, right? So when Haiti occurred, the big earthquake, and Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State, the Carbon War Room put together this entire plan and said, for 1/10 the cost, we could go in and actually, decarbonize all of Haiti, but also like empower, local entrepreneurs and do all this stuff, right? We had all these people like Alison Archambault and others who like went down there. She's a good personal friend of mine, and the Clinton administration was like, hell no, we would rather Haiti actually import propane from Venezuela than to promote clean energy solutions, right? Fine, whatever. But now we're in Jamaica, right? Jamaica has done extraordinary things. When you think about all the work the Loan Programs Office has done in Puerto Rico, Jamaica has already done all the reforms that we asked Rico to do. They've already split their grid into 8 individual microgrids, right? So that each one is sort of like independent of the other, so they don't take them all down, right? And you see that Jamaica actually has part of their grid is still operating because of the way that they structured it. Now we can put in solar and battery storage and give them $1 billion in financing and power the entire country with clean energy very quickly, and the diesels would stay as backup power because you might need it. I mean, getting something decarbonized by 90% is super cheap. Getting it decarbonized by 100% is pretty expensive, right? So we decarbonize at 90%, leave the diesels in for the last 10%, fine, right? Now that we could do, but the amount of brain power that's required to do that is very high, and I can find it, right? But then they separately need to beg people to put $1 billion into it, right? And folks are like, I don't know. I know the returns are 30%, but I just, I can't be bothered to work in Jamaica, right? Even though you've got the DFC, you've got the World Bank, you've got all of these Inter-American Development Bank that can provide guarantees, et cetera. And so a lot of us need to call in favors from our friends to say, hey, why are you replacing all of the diesels in Jamaica with more diesels, right?
Mhm.
Now, if we successfully did that, which Chris Shelton over at AES did all this extraordinary work in Puerto Rico, that work can be fully transferred and AES could do that. Then I think you would find that every time there's a disaster in the world, which is every week, right? We would convert every single one of these folks to clean energy, right? But right now, when you look at our ecosystem of philanthropies and then our ecosystems of supply chain, and then the world's smartest people who actually operate grids, right? They're not ready to rise to the occasion. And that's our fault. And we need to fix that.
I'm going to ask you, I have a million more questions, but I'm going to maybe leave it to this one, and then we'll go on to some of the questions from others. You mentioned the Clinton administration, not supporting that transition.
Well, the Clinton Secretary of State, yeah.
Because during the Clinton administration, there was a vice president available there who Al Gore, who understood climate change, was very aware, very concerned, went on to let us all know about it.
Yep.
Didn't seem to have much impact back then. Clinton also, promoting fossil fuel deployment and expansion and things like that. Any feel for? I mean, not that you necessarily personally had discussions on this, but any feel for why there was so little attention to just politically not an interesting subject for people back then? Climate.
I mean, it's exactly what I'm saying to you now, right? Look, I think Al Gore is a champion. I love that guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when he came out in 2008 with an entire plan/speech around how we could decarbonize our country in just 10 years, right? You remember this? He went to GW, made the big speech and said, we could power our entire country with solar and wind and battery storage and, clean energy, right? People did not believe that that was a positive future. People didn't believe that that was good. People thought that that was crazy talk. Not only was the cost, right, whatever it was,
Mm-hmm.
but I think people just didn't believe him. Certainly President Obama didn't believe him. This was right after President Obama got, elected, but not yet inaugurated, right? And so that's on us. This is what I'm saying, is that what I've done my entire career is say that this is a better future. This is better from human health perspective, from volatility perspective, from all sorts of perspectives, right? But I think the vast majority of our colleagues have said, you know what, Jigar, I love you, but I think climate catastrophe is a far better approach to communication than climate optimism, which is what you're promoting, Jigar. And so screw you, we're going to do it our way. And they did it for God knows 15 years. They've scared the bejesus out of people, from everyone from Greta Thunberg to this person and that person, right? And I love those people. I am not bad-mouthing them. I'm not suggesting I wish they didn't exist or whatever else. They have the right to their approach, right? But I think at this point, everyone recognizes what I said was true, that climate optimism and showing that this is a better world for everybody is a better communication talking point than saying climate catastrophe, right? That does not empower people to pass big policies or legislation. It empowers people to shut down. And if you look at President Biden, he absolutely leaned into this hard. That's how we got the Inflation Reduction Act passed, was through optimism. It was not through catastrophe. And I just hope that everyone recognizes that while 2 and 3 degrees are scary, right? If you want to pass legislation, optimism is how you do it, not pessimism and catastrophe.
Well, I would say the Republican Party uses fear.
Well, I'm never going to change them.
And they're quite effective at doing it. You're going to lose your SUV. They're going to take away your stove. The brown people are going to come, take your jobs and rob you and think. It's almost 100% fear, and works very effectively. They get a lot of people to vote for them. So
totally, I'm not going to change what.
And climate is real as opposed to that stuff. So
well, look,
I think being honest about the future is maybe a better approach.
No, it's not a better approach. I mean, just to be crystal clear, Dan, it is not a better approach. There's not a single person in the social sciences that agrees with you. Not one. Not one person believes that you are going to win elections by scaring people half to death. Now, I'm not suggesting that I can fix the way that the Republican Party gathers votes, but I am saying that there are a lot of people right now who are inspired by AI and all the stuff that's occurring. You and I both know that the only way we're going to get all that AI load growth online by 2030 and reduce emissions is by deploying a crap load of batteries.
Hmm.
That's it. That's the only chance we have. We can't do it through natural gas. You can't do it through coal. The only way to do it is to deploy batteries and get more out of the grid we've already paid for, right? And so I think there are ways for us to win this argument, but Lord Almighty, like I am not going to fight with our own side, right? Like I'm going to do what I do. I've been
Hmm.
extraordinarily effective, and like people are now listening
Yeah.
to me in ways that they weren't before. And I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm not going to badmouth the other people. Let them do what they want to do. But I'm just telling you, there's not a social scientist in the world that believes that that's the right way to influence people.
Well, so let me just ask the general question, which was actually here, one of my last questions for you, is we're not on track to deal with the warming, which continues until we get rid of all fossil fuel emissions. I totally agree. We're on the track to for renewable dominance, clean energy dominance. Just
The electro state.
the cost, but that's not the same as being safe from climate, which we're not on track for. And is there a way, since you gave some examples of ways not to do it, what do you think are ways we could get policies that directly impact fossil fuels, emissions, as opposed to promoting renewables? How can we get that done? What needs to happen for that to happen?
I think that we have to believe in ourselves and believe that we're going to win on the battlefield of deployment, right? Like if I passed policy next week, which I think I could, right, that said that the grid is at the lowest utilization rate ever. That's why rates are going up at faster than the rates of inflation, right? So we need to force the utilities and their regulators to increase the asset utilization of how we use our wires today by 20 percentage points, right? From
Mm-hmm.
less than 50% to, over 50%, right? To 65%, right? Um, that 97% of what we deployed would be clean and we would decarbonize the grid, right? But most people would say, well, Jigger, I'm not going to support that unless you ban behind the meter natural gas. I don't know that I get it passed if I ban behind the meter natural gas. But like, I think if you passed a policy measure that said that the utilities and their regulators have to now be forced to use what we've already paid for more efficiently and reduce people's electricity bills 20% by 2030, the vast majority of that would be done with batteries and solar, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that's the kind of policy we have to lean into now. We have to lean into the stuff that is enabled by 95% cheaper stuff, right? Like, I just think we have to lean into that, right? And the same thing is true in commercializing geothermal and nuclear, right? I mean, and so I think that we are on track now, right? In a way that's 10 years late. And I think we could have done this in 2015, but Bill Gates stood in the way, whatever. And now we're going to like move to saying innovation, yes, but we're really focused on deployment of technologies that save people money at gigaton scale, right? And I think that we have the workforce, we have the capital, we have a lot of that stuff in the West. And then separately, I think we need to focus on international markets. There are 50 markets ready to go right now who desperately want us to come with our big guns, and we have been shy.
Okay. I have a million more questions for you. The great discussion, by the way, really fascinating. We're going to bring in Stacy, and Stacy's maybe has a question for you, and then we're going to take a look at maybe a few questions from our YouTube folks. Hey, Stacy.
Hey, Dan. Hey, Jurger. And for everybody who was asking, here they are. We are a cat video program. We
We're
do
trying to get our
videos.
numbers up by showing cat videos.
Yeah,
So.
I'm doing my part.
Oh, by the way, everyone, I forget, I can never say this, but like and subscribe, please. It really does help. The algorithm spreads the program to many more people. I should say that right up front, but please do and share with your friends. Go ahead, Stacy.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I have so many questions. Everyone else has so many questions. One of the ones I wanted to ask that, well, first I had to back up. You were saying the British Columbia's carbon tax program was a failure. They called it fee and dividend, but it wasn't fee and dividend. Fee and dividend is when you get a check in the mail, and they did it through tax rebates, and that is completely different. People don't see it, they don't feel it. It is not fee and dividend. So I just wanted to clarify that. Is that your understanding? Because that's what the Google told me.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I mean, all I'm saying to you is that, people have to pass stuff, right? So people have been talking about fiat and dividend for a long time. We have whatever we have, British Columbia, et cetera, right? And it didn't work. Just want to make crystal clear. It did not send the signals necessary to deploy solutions at scale. It didn't work. It just it was on this side, and then the deployment stuff was a separate set of policies, right? Setting a price on carbon just doesn't work. And it hasn't worked for decades.
Okay.
I like Dan, believe it could. I wanted to ask the funding. So Chelsea Sexton worked with you, and I know her pretty well.
She's awesome.
Yeah, she is. And I used to ask her all the time, because we're bike people, why aren't we funding bikes? And she said, it has to be in the US, and we're pretty lax on that. I get it. But I know that there are bike companies that manufacture in the US, and is it just that they didn't raise their hand, or you were waiting for Joet to do something, or why didn't
what are
we
we
fund more of
suggesting?
them?
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, bike sales are off the charts, right? I mean, so are electric bike sales. So what is
And
it that
getting
you're
more manufacturing here in the US would have been a boon as well. So helping those companies get off
they
the ground.
qualified for manufacturing in the US?
Okay, I guess it's did they know how to do it? Did we go after them the way we went after batteries?
Of course we did.
We did? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just saying, look, it is what it is, but the Chinese absolutely make bikes that you can buy at Walmart for $60. And the folks who make bikes here, sell their bikes for $1,400.
Well,
And so
e-bikes.
even regular bikes, right? So the regular bikes that you make here are premium bikes, right? The bikes you buy from Huffy that are sold at Walmart are, $60, right? And so the people that I met here in this country don't want to make $60 bikes. They can't be profitable selling $60 bikes. And so the question becomes, do we create a bunch of tariffs to actually make it more expensive for people to buy bikes from China so that people can make bikes more profitable here? Or do we just focus local manufacturing here on premium products? Or, how do the American people want to structure, this particular issue, right? Because we can go through this on 10 different sectors, right? Furniture, clothing, lots of things. So we have to pick and choose, right? So there are certain areas that we
why don't we do that on EVs? Why are we banned from getting cheaper EVs, but not from getting cheaper bikes?
Because there are a lot of people in the National Security Council, as well as the National Economic Council, who recognize that having a strong automotive supply chain is the key to our national defense posture. And if all of those guys went bankrupt and we moved all of our auto manufacturing to China, we would likely be unable to just make basic military equipment. And so they decided that they wanted to subsidize automotive supply chains in the United States.
But under the Democratic administrations, they have admitted that climate change is one of the biggest dangers for our defense.
Yeah, yes? That's why they protected our EV supply chain.
Okay, Stacey, we're going to go to Eli for a bit, and then when we come back, we'll get some of the YouTube questions. Okay.
Yep.
Here we go. And Eli, welcome. What's your question for Jigar?
Thank you. So a lot of what you've been saying seems, perhaps not coincidentally, to be rather well focused to be a message to that lines up with what both political parties learned from the elections last Tuesday, that affordability is really, really critical going forward for both parties. So I wonder, how much have you been working to get the organizations that political representatives and people who would like to be political representatives more familiar with this message, like Act Blue or other organizations?
Well, I mean, I think that when you think about where we've been in the past, right? I think that there has been an alignment where the electric utility executives are the largest donors to governors, right? So whether it's Democratic governors or Republican governors, right? So, and most governors just don't care about any of these energy issues, right? So ultimately they like basically refer to the executives from the utilities as their main Sherpas through a lot of this stuff, right? And I think that when you think about where we are today, we are finally breaking through. So, both I think Governor elect Spanberger and Cheryl have recognized that the utilities are not the way in which this is going to succeed, right? That they have been holding back the deployment of technology. And now they're going out to another set of experts to try to figure out what other solutions they have to make electricity bills more affordable. Now we're putting our ideas in front of them, right? Whether it's a deployment of batteries or whether it's rooftop solar or whether it's, demand flexibility programs through virtual power plants or grid enhancing technologies to get way more out of the grid that we've already paid for, all of that stuff. And these are new concepts for them. Like they've never heard of these concepts, right? And so now the question becomes, how much are they going to spend in terms of their political power that they just got from the election on these big topics? And we're giving them courage, right? We're getting the state legislatures to tell them that this is a great idea, right? I mean, we got 15 climate champions in Virginia elected into the Virginia House of Delegates. We're too short from a supermajority in the House of Delegates. But the Senate in Virginia is only 21-19. So we got to figure out where the votes are for getting these things passed, right? And we have to do all the work. I mean, the governor is going to do a little bit, but they're not going to do a lot, right? And so they want to make sure that the votes are already lined up before they move forward, right? And I think when you think about just how complicated this stuff is, I get the fact that people are frustrated. And they're like, Jigar, why doesn't people just understand? They don't. And so we're doing the work. Most of these governors don't know the difference between DC and AC power. They don't know the difference between distribution grids and transmission grids.
Okay. Hey, Eli, thanks. We're going to head back to Stacy and get into some of the YouTube.
Okay. There are so many good questions. Oh my gosh. One of the ones that was more of a commentary around what early on in the conversation you were saying about how anything that advocates do is a losing battle, and that they're costing elections. And to Brian's point, if we could win political battles but lose the planet, so how do we explain that to our kids, that it's okay to make these trade-offs and jeopardize not just them, but people and children all around the world?
I mean, you can't, right? It's fundamentally dissonant, right? Like, I mean, I don't tell my 10-year-old that these things are politically tough. I tell my 10-year-old, we are using the natural capital of the planet in unsustainable ways, and that we all need to find a better way to, coexist with the national capital, right? That is in the world, right? That being said, I'm just saying to you right now that, that I don't think it's climate advocates, by the way, that have lost us elections or whatnot. I'm saying that to the extent that climate advocates push solutions that make affordability more difficult, then they don't have a lot of support for their ideas.
Yeah,
right.
but
And
everything gets dirt cheap if we would just shift where the money goes. I mean, how much do we give in fossil fuel subsidies? How much do we spend on defense? I mean, if we just moved things over in the other direction, we could have healthcare for everyone and cheap solar. I mean, it would just be
we could, but we
a
don't.
whole other world.
We could, but we don't. Look, I mean, the United States.
Isn't it special interest, though, that both on insurance as well as on energy?
There's special interests everywhere, but we could have elected Bernie Sanders and we didn't, right? We tried to create a public option in Obamacare, and Joe Lieberman, rest his soul, blocked it, right? So I mean, look, I hear you and I get that everyone's frustrated, and I'm totally fine for everyone to be frustrated at me, because if that makes people sleep better at night, that's great. But I'm just saying that I win on a regular basis. I get things passed, I get things done, and I move enormous amounts of capital into solutions. Do I wish I could have done it faster? Yes, of course I do. But at the end of the day, right, if people are like, well, but Jigger, let's just go scorched earth and just destroy it all. You should do that, man. Like there are people all the time that are laying down on the roads, creating 7 hours of traffic in the UK. I don't think they're winning a single heart and mind by doing that. But if it makes them feel better, they should do it. They should do what they think is the right avenue. And I can comment on the fact that I think they're losing, support by doing that.
Yeah. There's other questions around, are EVs the answer? And I had mentioned
no, of course they're not the answer.
Okay.
But I think I explained to you why they're the answer now, right? I mean, our entire defense industrial complex is based on our ability to win batteries and electric motive, right? That is how all of this stuff is going, whether it's drone technology or whether it's tanks, whether it's whatever stuff. And so like they made a strategic decision to do that. I think urban planning and density in cities and walkable communities and all that stuff are far better than converting all of our cars in this country to electric, right? And I work on that too, right? I live in a walkable community myself. But I'm just saying that it's hard. There's a lot of work to do.
Okay. And any other statement? Because we're taking more of Jigger's
That's
time.
all right.
Yeah. I guess the only other one is not an area that you had oversight over, but is when it comes to climate, something that we talk about, and that is, would you support a meat tax?
Would I support a meat tax? No. This is exactly the area of bad thinking that people continue to go down, right? I mean, making things unaffordable for poor people is dumb. Let's just be crystal clear that it's dumb and people should stop doing it, right?
But what we spend on corn and ethanol subsidies, I mean,
we should get rid of corn and ethanol subsidies. I agree. But that's different than saying that we should put on a meat tax. Could you imagine putting on a meat tax and then going into the electorate and realizing just how much people would just yell at you and vote for somebody who is anti-immigrant, pro-Nazi just because you pissed them off?
I grew up in what I call Pennsylvania, so I know.
You know exactly who these people are. I grew up in Sterling,
yes.
Illinois. That's exactly how this works. And so let's just stop doing stupid things.
Because so again, I'm going to get back to the basic question. Without disagreeing with what you're saying, that is the way it is. Obviously, we have Trump as president. I mean, so obviously no one's voting for climate. I mean, my God. So, and they're responding to the price of eggs under Biden, even though they're higher under
totally
Trump or whatever, that kind of thing. But the reality is climate is this diabolical problem that almost designed by them like an evil mastermind, so that we would know everything about it, we would know how destructive it's going to be, and that we wouldn't do anything about it. And that's the current situation, is that we're doing things to, well, the renewable energy is great, but again, only fossil fuel emissions count towards climate change, and that's not dropping at all, or certainly not dropping rapidly. So we need to be in a different future where the kind of arguments you're making today won't apply, because we have different political leadership, we have a different electorate that's more aware than they are now. Any thoughts on how we get from where we are today to where we need to be to actually address climate change in a serious manner?
Well, remember that our energy system globally is very large. We only got to scale such that 100% of all growth is coming from clean energy sources this year, right? So I get the fact that I would have loved for it to happen 10 years ago. This is why I hate Bill Gates. But I'm just saying that it only happened this year. Now I need to figure out how to get that to 2x our growth, right? So that we can start to retire the stuff that is, that's been in place that we need to retire, right? In a faster level. That is what I know how to do. Separately, people who are way smarter than me at social movements need to get Earth Day to happen again at scale. When you think about 10% of the entire American population participated in the 1970 first Earth Day, right? We had 7.5 million people participate in No Kings, right? In a few months ago. That's not 10% of the population, right? So like we need to get 10% of the population who believes that climate change is really like an existential crisis to combine forces with no kings and get 10% of the entire population to come out. I don't think it's impossible, but they do, right? That's what it takes to get dictators like Trump, like to, like feel it and then resign, right? All of those things. But I just think that you have to be able to hold all of these things in your head at the same time. I get the fact that people just want to rage right now because, I mean, any sober look at 2 degrees and 3 degrees like freaks people out. Of course it freaks people out. It freaks me out, right? But then at the same time, like you're like, well, how are we going to, get 8 billion people, right, on board with this message, right? And like they're not going to give up a modern lifestyle. They're not going to say, yeah, let me just like give up everything I want in life so that we can save the planet. They're just not going to do it, right? And then they elect people like Trump, and he just basically says climate change is a hoax and that he's not even sending a delegation to Brazil. And then people are like, Jigger, it's your fault. Okay, great, man. Like, I get it. Go with God.
Okay.
Though I dropped in the chat, one of the people in the audience mentioned that there is a recent study. This one was published out of Stanford this July. 100,000 die in the U.S. every year from air pollution. So it is something that is affecting people here. It's not just in.
That's not climate change, to be clear.
No,
But
it's
I
not at
hear
all.
you.
It's
No.
purely
That's
fossil
what we're.
fuel pollution. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it's
Yeah.
millions in China, it's millions in India, but here it's about 100,000 number I've heard,
No, I
which is
agree.
a very big number compared to
And a
everything
very
else.
compelling number. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger
Oh,
says regularly that we should focus on air pollution over climate because that is a much more compelling message, and largely, stopping air pollution also, helps solve some of the climate issues.
well, here on Climate Chat, by the way, in addition to interviewing folks like yourself and climate scientists, we do actually spend a lot of time with communicators like David Fenton,
Yeah, of course.
George Marshall, and others, because this problem that you're identifying, which we're very aware of, the public isn't engaged like they need to be, and we are always trying to figure that out. And that seems to be maybe the hardest part of all of this. Actually, is the understanding the climate. We have a pretty good handle on that. It's
We do
probably
have a
worse
good
than
handle.
we've heard, but we're getting more information all the time. Solutions, as you're pointing out, are abundant and cheap and getting cheaper. And if we do the right things financially, we can deploy them even faster.
Which that's a question, because Dan, you've said this often, and I take it as gospel. Renewables are cheaper. They are cheaper than every other form of energy at this point in time.
Well,
Is that
what I add, when you take all costs into account, right?
okay?
Fossil fuels
Okay.
are subsidized many ways, both directly and the fact that they don't pay for the 8 million people that die. I mean, so that's why they're actually the most expensive form
But
of energy.
renewables are also the only choice you have. Like, I mean, if your utility fails you such that you're paying 34 cents a kilowatt hour for your power in Massachusetts, the only way that you can actually like save yourself from that is solar. It's not like you're going to put a diesel generator in your backyard and figure out a way to like like supply your power, or natural gas for that matter, right? Or a big wind turbine, right? It's going to be mostly solar, right? And so like look, I just think that we are at a point right now where renewables are just taking so much market share. It's just crazy. Like even with the Trump administration in power, 80% of everything added to the grid this year is solar, wind, and battery storage, right? And so, I mean, it is happening all the time. But I
And
I want
China,
to make
like gangbusters. Right?
well, China's going gangbusters, and they're adding nuclear at gangbuster rates as too now, right? So like, I think that like the big thing that we all need to figure out is I get how much of an existential crisis this is. I have since I ran the Carbon Worm. I'm not sure I knew a lot about it before then. But I just think that when you think about affordability for people who actually, like have energy burden on it, a lot of these ideas are making energy burden worse. And we all need to like recognize what that means, because like as somebody who is a generally wealthy person, right? Like, energy costs are de minimis part of my budget every year, but it's not de minimis for most other people. And I think that like we constantly come up with policies that will dramatically increase their energy burden. and that's not going to work.
Well, again, I've given a TEDx talk on this, but if you do fee and dividend correctly,
I
then
hear you, but pass it somewhere.
70% of the folks make money on it. So
I promoted that, but like pass it somewhere. I was not able to. Maybe you can succeed where
well,
I
I think it's
failed
passed
miserably.
in certain forms, but they didn't understand the marketing aspect of it.
You
That
can say whatever you want to
Yeah.
say, Dan. I'm pretty sure they understood all of it and failed. I'm pretty sure they couldn't get people on side. I think BC wanted to make it fee and dividend and they couldn't get it to the finish line.
Yeah.
Right? And so it is what it is. Like you and I can disagree, but I'm just saying like there are lots of places around the world where climate is a big deal. Like in Europe, it still pulls like top 3. So if you want to like actually pass fee and dividend, do it. Go
Well,
get
there they started
Europe.
with a cap and trade, and they made it closer and closer to fee and dividend over time because cap and trade doesn't work.
I get
very
it,
well.
but I'm just saying, like, if you can't make it happen at this point, Dan, I'm pretty sure it's because it's pretty damn hard to get it done.
Oh, politically,
Right?
absolutely.
And so like,
No, there's no
let's
question.
not just like have these throwaway lines anymore about like, well, if we just did this, we're going to succeed. Because you and I have tried to pass some of these things and we've failed. So then like, I don't know, I guess I could try it for the 18th time, but sometimes like, sometimes like there's something else that the social scientists are telling us that we should listen to.
Maybe
Oh no, I think
California.
I don't
Why
think
don't
we
we
No,
figured it out
California
yet.
has failed miserably, to be clear, Stacey. Like
So-
completely and utterly failed in every single possible way
Wait, what?
on what it
Sorry,
is that you're
repeat that.
suggesting.
What
What
failed?
do you I mean, go on. I'm not
California
going to
has
disagree with you,
failed
but
miserably in every single way. I mean, like to suggest that it is affordable in any way to live in California right now as a poor person or middle class person is ridiculous. I mean, it's 56 cents a kilowatt hour in San Diego Gas and Electric's territory, let alone PG&E's territory where the peak is 70 cents a kilowatt hour, right? And that's not because of renewables, it's because of bad policy in California,
It's
right?
also
And so
because of
like
fire, suppression, right?
I
They
mean,
burn
I
down
don't think
towns.
that, but like, I mean, I've looked at that data and it's far less than people think it is. I think most of it's just malfeasance. But all I'm saying is that like California has not been a hotbed of great ideas the last 15 years. And so maybe you could change it now. I mean, Gavin Newsom's out of office.
Eli's saying it's 13 cents a kilowatt hour for LADWP.
That's a municipal utility, but I'm just saying for
Where
the
I
stuff
live,
that the
it's
state
50
of
cents.
California regulates it, right? So SCE, PG&E, and SDG&E, which is where the vast majority of people live in the state of California, like not even close
Yep.
to good policy.
Where I live, it's crazy. I mean, during the peak time, but even the non-peak is still way higher than the national average. So it's
It's just nuts. California hasn't. Yeah, like let's not like. I mean, if you want to try good policy in California, be my guest. But I'm just saying, like, CARB, the way that they provide their subsidies, right? Like, almost all of their subsidies.
I'm not gonna fight you on CARB. Nope.
So I'm just saying that. Look, I mean, I love the people of California. They're ridiculously smart people there. But like, wouldn't suggest that you could pass this policy.
No. Hey, Jigar, I want to thank you for coming on the program, and
Of
what an
course.
interesting discussion, and sort of a lot to think about. First of all, don't really disagree with what you say about how things are. They are what they are, but they're also not set up yet to get us out of this mess, and we do have to figure out.
Well, we have to set them
something
up
differently.
We got to set them up. So, well, I appreciate you having me on, and keep doing it, man. It's super important.
Great. Anyway, thanks to Jigar and Stacy, Eli, and everyone leaving comments. Again, like and subscribe, please, and so that this conversation and all the others we have can be seen by more, because as we're learning today, it's going to be important that more people understand the climate situation we're in. And anyway, so thanks everyone, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you.